Hello and happy Sabbath to the Zomi Family Convention in Nashville, Tennessee. I wish I could be there with you this weekend. It's been sad for me to not be there with you. I've enjoyed every family convention and national convention that you guys have held, that I've been to, really since my first one around 2016 here in Battle Creek, Michigan. And anyways, so I send my regrets in not being present with you there this weekend. My wife has had some medical challenges lately, and many of you know about them, and so thank you for keeping us in prayer. She's on the mend. We're grateful for that, and but it's meant a real change in my schedule and priorities and where I can be present in this season. I was asked to share a short thought for the AY program about family, parents, children, family, and Adventist youth. The AY program, it is an important time to get together and to be together. I recognize on a hot day like today, hopefully you're in an air-conditioned location, but on a warm day like this, it's nice to be inside where it's air conditioned. I remember last year when we had the AY program, it was really hot there in Indiana at Indiana Academy in the gym, and we tried to do what we could to cool the place off, but it was just so warm for everyone. And so I hope though that you can get together, that you can enjoy a blessed time of fellowship, of growth, of learning, etc. So in talking about the subject today, as I've been wrestling and thinking and praying about it, I thought I'd share something that might be fairly common for many, but maybe share some nuances. So in Exodus chapter 20, verse 12, we have what is called the fifth commandment. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long on the land. And so, honoring our mother and father, honoring our parents, it's part of the Ten Commandments. There's something important, though, to keep in mind, though, when it comes to the Ten Commandments. First of all, the Bible never refers to the Ten Commandments as the Ten Commandments. They're referred to as the Decalogue, the Ten Words, or the Torah. It's important to keep that in mind because we often portray the Ten Commandments as the 10 imperatives. Thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. Or, remember and honor. But the Ten Commandments were not written in the imperative. In the Hebrew language, they were written in what's called the imperfect form, indicating that there is an antecedent or a previous clause that sets the stage for how these 10 words or the Decalogue are to be understood. First and foremost, we find that in Exodus 20, verse 1 and 2. I'll start there. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. First and foremost, before we even get to the 10 words, God is making clear He is the Lord, and that He's the one who brought them out of the land of Egypt. He brought them salvation. Salvation comes first before the commandment. And this is clear in Exodus 19 as well, as all of Israel is assembled there at the foot of Mount Sinai. And as they're there, they're waiting. God tells Moses, when the time is right, come up upon the mountain. And in the Hebrew, in the New King James, and some of the more modern translations, this is a little more clear. That God intended in Exodus 19 for all of Israel to go up upon the mountain and to receive His words. But instead the people feared and they trembled, and they sent Moses instead and said, you go talk with God, we're not going. There was a breaking of relationship. And so the 10 words, the Decalogue, come on the heels of that experience in which God spoke these words and all the people heard them from Mount Sinai. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. God brought salvation to his people first, before he brought them the 10 words. Now, it's important to remember that the 10 words had been around since creation. This is the first place in Exodus 20 where they were made explicit. But they were embedded within God's people long before, from creation. And we read all through the book of Genesis how God's people knew of and were aware of and practiced these 10 words. Therefore, before we begin to think about the 10 commandments as things that we do, it's all rooted in a salvational covenant relationship with God Almighty. So when we come to the 5th word, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. When we come to that, that's being included within this concept, okay? The 5th word is also a principle of honor. We see where children in Genesis honored their parents and dishonored their parents, all through the book of Genesis. Some examples of these would be Isaac. Isaac honored his parents. We see the examples of Jacob, where Jacob dishonored and honored his parents, where Jacob's sons dishonored the family name by going out and killing the people of Shechem after circumcising all the men. There are many moments within the book of Genesis where there is both honor and dishonor. But let's unpack this. What does this mean? It's really important to remember that these words were spoken in a context of a shame-honor culture. Israelite society, post-Egyptian emancipation or Egyptian exodus. Following all of that, these are a group of people that were living in a time and place. And so there were cultural customs that were present in which it was expected for people to interact with one another in honor. So, honoring in say, Israelite context around 1400 BC is going to look a little different than 21st century world context, be it Southeast Asian or American. There's going to be differences, but the principle is the same, but we have to look for how the principle applies into the cultural context, all right? This is really important. So honoring our parents is the vital, important principle, but how that's done in each culture is going to look different. That's really important. So let's unpack this a little bit. In a shame and honor society, honor of family, community, tribe, nation, land, name are more important than individual honor. This is really embedded within the concept in a shame and honor culture that a woman's virginity is preserved and is the most important link in an honor-shame society. Preserving the woman's virginity at all costs. And as long as she maintains her virginity and purity, the family has honor. This is in many shame and honor cultures around the world. There are different versions and varieties of this. So, therefore, in shame and honor society, whatever it takes to defend the name and the family is seen as an action of honor. So, in places that I've been around the world, if a woman is found having slept around or interacting with a male, or if a son has converted to Christianity or has engaged in other behaviors such as drinking, gambling, etc. In those cultures, because those actions bring dishonor to the name, the family name and the family tribe and the community, therefore the family, in the name of honor, can kill that individual. Yeah, they can kill that individual as a way of preserving their honor. because the honor has been lost. Therefore, the only way they can get that honor back is by killing the child because of what they've done. All right? This is practiced in many places. They're called honor killings. This is practiced in many places around the world, honor killings. And so it's this living out of this honor-shame society, and that the preservation of honor can only happen when that person has been killed as such. So how does that relate to us today? Today, here in America, in the West, it's a guilt, innocence, or justice-centered society where things are looked at and perceived differently because of the cultural framework. There's a relational framework within the shame and honor society. And the guilt justice society, things are seen through the lens of don't sin or discipline and atonement. There's a legal framework by which things are to happen and take place. And we see this, of course, within the legal laws of North America, of Europe, of the West, where when it comes to honoring parents, disciplining children, etc., there are legal frameworks and justice, and a justice system set up by which these things are mediated and processed, rather than done as an honor-shame family, where it's done in the family and things are done and exercised in that way. So it's important to keep that in mind. Now, I've been going on long enough. I don't want to take too much more time, but here's a few thoughts I want to share. There are 4 types of parenting styles. I share this because we've got to get to the point that if we're asking or inviting our children to honor us as parents, we need to be clear about how are we treating our children. Ephesians chapter 6 is very clear, verses 1 through 4, that while, yes, children are to honor, obey their parents, there's an even more clear warning that says parents are not to provoke their children. So how we as parents care for and model honor in our lives will influence the next generation as to how they will then reflect that honor to us. So here's 4 parenting styles that are important to keep in mind, and which one are you practicing? And if one of these that you're practicing, there's only one of these that's healthy, the other 3 are unhealthy. You need to be thinking about, how do I grow in my parenting styles? Okay? Here's the 4 parenting styles. This is from Diana Baumrind, 2005, also in a book called The Family by Balswick and Balswick. There's information out there. You can do your research on this. But the 4 parenting styles are authoritative, which is a combination of high level of support and control. This is conducive to developing competent children. It's the only one with biblical support, all right? The others are authoritarian. So an authoritarian parenting style is one with low support but high control. So there's a lack of support and emotional connection and emotional intimacy with the children, but a high control value that demands respect and action. But what this does in the child is it creates in the child the lack of development of independence and only moderate social competence. And eventually, depending on how high that control is, it will create resentment and contempt in the heart of the child because of that lack of support and emotional connection and a relationship and the high control. Most addicts that I work with in sexual and porn addiction come from families that are rigid and disengaged. So a rigid home is a home that's authoritarian. All rules, no relationship. Got it? Disengaged, I'll unpack that with the next one. Okay? So the next two parenting styles are permissive and neglectful. Okay? Permissive is high support, so it's all about relationship. I just want to be your best friend. But there's low control. And so the child then grows up with a lack of social competence and a lack of ability for interdependence. So there's there are consequences to our parenting styles, okay? And then there's neglectful parenting style, where there's low support and low control. This is just basically not providing the adequate resources, instruction, such as relationship, emotional support, physical support, etc., as the children grow up. That results in a lack of bonding between parent and child. And the consequence of that is then, how do we expect our parents to honor our parents, honor us, when there's that lack of bonding, lack of relationship, and lack of support? So there are consequences to these parenting styles. And so which ones are we practicing? What parenting styles are we living and demonstrating? And the consequences of those will determine how our children will respond to us over the long term. This is really, really, really important. Parents, this is really important, okay? Going further, so I said rigid, disengaged home. Most people dealing with addiction come from rigid or disengaged families, okay? A rigid family is all rules, no relationship. Disengaged family is no relationship, no rules, no emotional support, no connection, etc. Okay? So a child who is growing up in this home is more likely to develop addictive behaviors of varying substance abuses, alcohol, smoking, drugs, pornography, or sexual addictions, or other substance abuses, workaholism, gambling, you name it. Okay? So how is your home? Is your home a rigid home? Is it a disengaged home? Are you developing deep emotional relational connections with your children or not? This is all really important and plays into the aspect of honoring our father and mother. Secondly, parents, how are you demonstrating honor to one another? Are you husbands, are you honoring your wives? It's really clear in Peter that when a husband does not honor his wife appropriately and respect her and love her well, that God doesn't answer his prayers. He doesn't hear his prayers. There's a direct connection there, all right? So husbands, how are you honoring your wives? Are you demonstrating that in a way that your children can look up to? Wives, how are you honoring your husbands? Are you demonstrating that in a way that your children can look up to? How are you honoring your parents, all right? So all of this is interrelated. Now, of course, with all of this, when you overlay the aspect of trauma, many of you have experienced a lot of difficulty and trauma as a result of being refugees, being displaced, having left Myanmar due to hardship, war, persecution in Myanmar, Burma. You have had to flee, and life became really hard before coming to the U.S. And then coming to the U.S., life is still hard. You've got to work often 10, 12-hour days, 6 days a week. Sometimes you're forced to work on Sabbath, and it's just makes it really difficult to be present for your kids. But this is all really important to keep in mind, that all of these things are factors that play into this. And so trauma is this umbrella or this foundation that affects all of this also. The trauma that we've received as parents when we were kids by our parents because of emotional neglect or physical neglect or abandonment, or betrayal because of a parent's adultery and separation and divorce. Like, those things happen. Those things affect us and affect our present relationships. And so unless we're healing and growing in that space, we can't expect to pass along to our children something better or expect something better from them without first knowing our story and our stuff. All right, so a biblical model of parenting consists of these things. A biblical model of parenting consists of these things. You can take some notes here. A remembering of God's covenantal care for his people. God demonstrates covenantal care for his people. Are you demonstrating covenantal care for your family? Number 2, God's responsive to human need. God responds to our human needs. Does our parenting reflect that response to human need? Our children have needs. In fact, in the book by Josh McDowell, I'm not going to remember all this off the top of my head, but in a book by Josh McDowell and Ben Bennett called Free to Thrive, they point out these 7 love needs of children. These 7 love needs of children. They all start with A. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but there's acceptance and affirmation and yeah, anyways, so I got 2 out of the 7. But there's these 7 love needs, and I didn't write this down before sharing this. But those 7 love needs are vitally important for children. And if those love needs are not being met, then they're growing up with holes in their hearts that they then fill with other things. They grow up with what's called emotional wounding. That creates what's called father or mother wounds. Coming back, a biblical model of parenting is that God bestows his richest gifts on us. How are you bestowing the gifts of your time, the gifts of your presence, the gifts of your story and your love, your emotional well-being to your children? What are your gifts, those richest gifts that you're giving to your children? God shows respect for values and cherishes us. There is no attempt to dominate. He gives freedom of choice. So parenting needs to keep in mind the principle of respecting value, cherishing the individual, not domination, but allowing freedom in order for the individual to grow. Now that comes with discipleship. Child raising is all about discipleship. It's discipleship. That's what it is. You're discipling your young children, and that takes time, truth, grace, in order for that transformation for their little lives to become something that reflects the love of God in their lives later on. Another point about biblical model of parenting is that God knows us intimately. Do you know your children intimately? Do you know your spouse intimately? And I'm not talking about intimate in the terms of sex, okay? Husbands and wives, you know each other intimately through sexual activity. Yes, that happens. But do you know your children intimately in getting to really know who they are? What makes them tick? What are their likes, their dislikes? What makes them them? And what's influencing their thoughts and their thinking in life? Do you know your children intimately? Another thing, God forgives. Forgiveness is so important within a family model of biblical parenting. And this means, yes, husbands and wives, you're forgiving of one another. But if you've done something wrong to hurt your child, you own it and you apologize to your child for the way you said something, the way you hurt them. You own that. You apologize for that. And then you practice that principle of forgiveness, where you forgive them and you lead them to forgive you for your trespasses. It's Matthew chapter 6. And then God does discipline. So discipline does happen within a biblical model of parenting. It's part of discipleship. We learn through discipline. And so is that discipline being fair, just, reasonable? Is it demonstrative of God's love and instruction, or is it just a vengeful discipline? I got some of those spankings when I was a kid that were vengeful and angry and abusive rather than corrective and teaching and honor and value and love. And so it's important to keep that in mind. So there's so many more things. I've already gone for over 20 minutes now. So just to kind of wrap up, I want to point us out to Deuteronomy 6. There's a lot of things in the Bible about this as you're turning to Deuteronomy 6. Keep in mind that in the Old Testament, after God gives these words in Exodus 20, God gives these words in Exodus 20. God then provides plenty of examples as to what this means. Exodus 21, 15, and 17 tell us that there's a premeditated striking, hitting, murder, and a premeditated cursing of one's parents. This reveals a condition of resentment and animosity in the heart towards the parents. Okay? Leviticus 19:3 tells us that we are to revere our father and mother, to hold them and treat them as special. Deuteronomy 21:18-21 says that if there's a rebellious and stubborn child, they're to be brought to the elders for judgment and then stoned. Right? And then stoned. Now, we don't live in a theocracy in which we practice those. But with the rebellious and stubborn child, we need to bring them to judgment and bring about ways for them to understand what they're doing. And if they're perpetuating in things, there needs to be a discipline of nature. Deuteronomy 27:16, cursed is the one who treats father and mother with contempt. All of these verses, the Exodus and 2 Deuteronomy texts, indicate that there's a heart condition of animosity and resentment. As young people, we all get upset with our parents. We've all done it. It's okay, you can own it. We all get upset with our parents, all right? But what's important to keep in mind is that the consequences that we see listed in Exodus and Deuteronomy are the reflections of a heart that has resentment and animosity and contempt for the parent. Not the, I'm upset, things didn't go my way, and I'm having an emotional meltdown. Okay, that needs to be cared for in a loving fashion, all right? And there's so much more that we could go on, but turn with me, like I said, Deuteronomy 6. We'll close with Deuteronomy 6 here. This is so important. I love Deuteronomy 6. Deuteronomy 6 comes on the heels of Moses' repeating of the Decalogue a second time. And so in Deuteronomy 6, Moses really brings out that's now verse 1. This is the commandment, these are the statutes and the judgments which the Lord your God has commanded you to teach you, that you may observe them in the land which you're going over to possess. All right, so again, this is salvation. Here's the way I want you to live. The imperfect, which sounds more like you will not, because I've saved you, you will not do these things. That's in the imperfect tense in the Hebrew. That you will fear the Lord your God, verse 2, and keep all of his statutes and his commandments, which I command you, and your son, or the words, or the Decalogue, the Torah, or the mizpat, also in the Hebrew. All the days of your life, that your days may be prolonged. But then you go down to verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord, our God, the Lord is one. Remember that there's one God. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. There's that foundational principle. Love, salvation, and love for God is the foundation for the following of the 10 words. And because the 10 words are written as imperfect, they're intended to be actually promises. Because I've saved you and because you love me, therefore, you're not going to have other gods. You're not going to make graven images. You're not going to take the name of God in vain. You're going to remember the Sabbath. You're going to honor your parents. You're not going to commit adultery or steal or lie or bear false witness. I think I got most of them. You will not murder. That's one I forgot. Yeah. So you will not murder. So anyways, because I've saved you and because you love me, you're not going to do these things. These are promises in your life because you've centered your life on me and because I've saved you. Verse 7, though, is really important. Oh, verse 6. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. And so there's this reminder that you shall take the Torah and bind it and teach it to your children. Live it out in the honor and love and the fear of God. And so this has to be lived out and demonstrated and taught to our children. Our children are being discipled in the ways of God. And that takes time and truth and grace for that transformation to come to pass. So remember that as when it comes to parenting, honoring our father and our mother, we don't want to provoke our kids. We want to love them. Press into their lives. Learn about them. Practice those elements of the biblical model of parenting. Covenantal care. Responding to human need. Giving the richest gifts into the lives of our children. Respecting values. And cherishing opinion. And cherishing the individuality and freedom of will in the other. Knowing intimately, forgiving, and owning wrongdoing, apologies, forgiving and apologies, and then discipline, discipleship. All of these things make a biblical model of parenting. So that said, I hope it will be blessed, and as you consider these remarks and practice them within your families. God bless you. Have a happy Sabbath. And I look forward to seeing some of you at the Zomi Youth Convention in Georgia next month. And hopefully, God willing, I'll see you next year at the next Zomi Family Convention. God bless you.